Hello, CrabCon. My name is Dan Comoss, and I'm going to be going over the ins and outs of toppers. Here's what to expect out of this presentation. I will be covering all aspects of building a topper from start to finish. This will include the following areas: cleaning, designing the layout, general tools needed, construction, along with adding the decor and making some decor, placement on the tank, and I'm briefly going to touch on insulating and heating. And also, as a bonus, a lot of these techniques aren't just for toppers. They can be used to make backgrounds within your regular tank. So there's a little bit here, I think, for everybody. In this presentation, I'm not really going to cover general crab care, if items are safe, or where to get the supplies. I figure all these have been discussed, and I don't really need to get into the detail because you can do research and find all that information 1,000 other places rather than here. So let's move on. Here's my generalized disclaimer. Some of the techniques I'm using are not meant to be used around hermit crabs. Some of the products, while I'm cleaning, aren't hermit crab safe, but this is an initial build, so the hermit crabs will not be around them. Just like the aquarium safe silicone you use inside your crab habitats, you're not supposed to use that around hermit crabs either. So use your best judgment when using these items. Doing a presentation like this is the furthest thing from my job description. I'm way more comfortable climbing around and fixing roller coasters and other amusement rides. But since I love hermit crabs, I'm going to give it the best go I can, so bear with me with any slip-ups or anything like that. Before I get started, I want to go over a little bit of my crabby history. In 2016 is when it all began, when I met my wife Samantha. I guess you can say she gave me crabs. I was watching her give her general care, feeding, giving them shells, this and that, and I found it interesting with the things they ate and everything else. And I would say in 2017 is when we really began our research, finding out what they really need, such as 6 inches of substrate, fresh and salt water, along with the non-store-bought foods. 2019 was probably our biggest hermit crab year. We attended the very first CrabCon up in Lockport, New York, where we received our very first captive bred babies. I also delivered Abby to Mary. She was a perlatus, otherwise known as a strawberry, that I had that was carrying eggs. Then a month later, I had another perlatus spawn in the saltwater pool, and unfortunately I wasn't prepared, and I attempted to raise them, but I only lasted about 10 days. And we have also been to every CrabCon since the first. During the height of the pandemic in 2020, we formed our shop, Cenobita Curiosities, and became a Lycos approved seller. I believe we were one of the very first enrichment shops dedicated strictly to hermit crabs. In the spring of 2023, we relocated about 60 miles south to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. During the process, we had to move our 30 hermit crabs. Now they have their own room in our own house. In 2024, I completed my very first topper. Before I get started with the topper build, I want to spend a little time and show people how we evolved with our hermit crab keeping. This is one of our early designs for a crabitat, and as you can see, a lot of the elements are there, but not quite ideal. But with a little bit of research through Lycos, Crab Street Journal, In a few other places, we managed to do a lot better for our crabs. Here's some more of our early crab habitats. Once again, a lot of the good elements are there, but not quite there yet. But with the constant research and learning, they slowly improve. Trust me. We are still learning at this point, but these two guys seem to be encouraging us, so we kept on going. I told you it would get a lot better. These are still early on, and we haven't really designed like major upgrades yet, but those are coming. These are some of the very first backgrounds that I built. The one on the right is our crabby nursery from our captive bred babies we received from the first CrabCon in 2019. This one was geared towards tiny hermit crabs with shells that are no bigger than a dime, so the substrate was a little bit lower, had smaller pools, just to cater to the babies. As you can see, it was a really big jungle gym for those guys. On the left is the background of what's left of my defunct park tank, Krabbyland. This was one of my first attempts with egg crate, and I used the crafting mesh to make an amusement park background. You can see the Ferris wheel, a wooden roller coaster, a drop tower, and a wheel and a saucer that I kind of made to look like whirl and hurl rides. That one lasted a while, and that was also a 29-gallon, like the Krabby Nursery. I really like the way this one turned out. For it only being a 20-gallon, I managed to cram a whole lot into it. Unfortunately, it was a 20-gallon, and, well, it didn't really have enough room for the amount of crabs we had, so it didn't last too long. But this here was probably one of my very first builds that I used egg crate extensively. I think the crabs really liked this one because underneath those shells it stayed pretty dark, so they could kind of just hang out there away from everything, not in a bright light, and you could peek in and see them just about any time. I really liked it, but once again it was too small and not very suitable for the amount of crabs we had, so it didn't last. So you want a topper. Here's a few things to consider before jumping into one. The reason I showed a lot of our older crab habitats is that when we first started, we were learning, and it took us a while to figure out how to maintain everything correctly. Once you do that, I feel you can advance and move on to toppers and other backgrounds within your tank. Don't forget, the more complex your tank is, the more difficult it is to maintain the correct temperature and humidity, which are some of the most critical things with keeping hermit crabs. So be sure you have the basics first before going and starting a topper. I believe we're ready to begin now. This here is the topper I'm going to be using. It's an Exoterra, and it measures 18 inches wide by 18 inches deep and 12 inches tall. It's not very big, but it'll fit on our 75-gallon tank just fine. And at the time of this presentation, these average around $120 off of Amazon or Chewy. So this one we received used and got it for free. Whether you have a new or used terrarium, cleaning should always be the first step. You never know where they were sitting around. Plus, it's good to just make sure everything is clean before starting. And I'm sure a lot of you remember this guy. Yep, that's right, it's Krusty. He's going to help me again with another presentation. This here is a basic list of cleaning supplies you'll need. Some white vinegar, rubbing alcohol, utility knife and blades, some paper towels, a shop vac or a mini shop vac, along with a pair of gloves. The list can go on, but these should be the basics that you need to clean. Krusty's such a big help. He already gathered up all the supplies we need. So, let's get started. I always begin my cleaning with white vinegar on a sponge. Simply put the white vinegar on the sponge and start wiping down the inside. Once I have it wiped down, I'll rinse it all really good with water, take a look to see what it looks like, and repeat the process again, and again, and again. I'll usually do this 2 or 3 times at least until I'm happy with the way it looks. And then usually the next day I'll go over it again. Never can be too clean, right? Oh no. It looks like Krusty found some residual from command hooks. Looks like it's stuck on there. How are we going to get that off? Normally with a hook like this, there's a little tab at the bottom that you can pull, and it pulls the sticky right off of the back. Unfortunately, this was cut off, which makes removing this a lot more difficult. So I'm going to need to get a little creative to do so. This wasn't the most ideal situation, but I tried using a razor blade to pull a lot of this stuff off. For pieces of tape and other things like that, sort of like the stuff on the left, that worked really great. But on the right, where that hook had the sticky behind it, that was a little bit more difficult, and the razor blade didn't work at all. So what I basically did is use WD-40. Working in the amusement industry at amusement parks, we end up dealing with gum, stickers, and whatever else people put on rides or anywhere else in the park. And we found that WD-40 really helps break down any adhesive. Simply spray that on, leave it sit for a couple minutes, and then you can use a razor blade to easily scrape it off. But once again, with a WD-40, it's not safe around hermit crabs and should only be used in the initial cleaning. Once you're done using the WD-40, you need to make sure that you clean the whole entire tank down again with your vinegar, along with rinsing it with water. I always like to repeat that process several times just to make sure any residual is gone. Now that we have a squeaky clean tank, we can begin with the design. Once again, Krusty's going to help us. He's such a good little handy crab. As you get started with your design, you're going to want to have a bunch of your decor readily available to look at and figure out spacing and everything else. Here's a lot of the common items that you're going to want to have handy for when you start building. Your egg crate, various size zip ties, aquarium safe silicone, corner guards, which I'll get to later on, a bunch of fake plants, hides, along with other decor such as hanging ropes, wheels, temperature gauges, and whatever else you can think of that you might want. And also a really good imagination. I start off by measuring how much egg crate I'm going to need for my background. Then I just simply cut it a little bit shorter than what I need. That way I know it's guaranteed to fit. Once it's cut, I'll do a few test fits just to make sure it goes in and out to where it needs to be without any issues. After all, you don't want to get too far and then find out you got to redo everything again. When I'm doing a background, I always like to have all the decor I'm going to add. That way, it's just a matter of placing it out and switching things around and see what I like and how it works. I always think about the location and also with the doors, how much things are going to stick out and possibly get in the way of food dishes and water bowls that are in the lower tank. After all, you really don't want to make that stuff impossible to get to. Once you have a background you think you're going to like, it's time to begin the construction of it. Here I'm going to go through some tools along with some other things such as the corner guards and how I like to attach my backgrounds to make them very easy to remove. These are some of the tools we use on a day-to-day basis with our Etsy shop, along with doing our day-to-day rituals with our hermit crabs, such as tidying up, moving things around. Tape measure, flush cut and needle nose pliers, utility knife, a drill along with bits, disposable gloves, spring clamps, a Sharpie, along with scissors. There's a lot more tools. You could get more elaborate, but this should be enough to get you by with just about anything. This here is just a shot of the previously mentioned tools. As you can see, it's not a whole lot, but it's definitely enough for what we need to do with a crabitat. Let's talk about cutters really quick. There's a big difference in the types, and I don't think a lot of people know the difference. In these two pictures, there's two different types of cutters. We have flush cut along with just your standard diagonal cutters. If you look at the picture on the right, the top two pair of pliers are the flush cut, whereas the bottom is just a standard pair of diagonal cutters. The flush cut do just that. When you cut something with them, it leaves a very clean edge, whereas the diagonal cutters leave a little bit of something left behind. This here is just a quick comparison of the two different cuts you get from the pliers. On the left is a flush cut, and on the right is a diagonal cutters. When you're looking at the egg crate, you can easily see the difference. I prefer the flush cut just because it leaves a lot cleaner look, and I just think it looks better. I start my backgrounds off pretty much like everybody else. I use the green panels and attach them to the egg crate. The one thing I always do is leave one square of the egg crate exposed on each of the sides and the top. Once I have it cut right, I just add a few zip ties around the edges and a handful in the middle just to secure it for now. With all the additional decor I add, it'll be more than secure once I'm finished. This is a better picture of the green panel attached to the egg crate. You can also see very clearly the 1-inch square that I'm talking about on two of the three sides. I'll go into more detail with this in the next few slides. You'll see why and the payout later on. Trust me. This here is what I consider my secret weapon of building a crabitat. Corner guards. Corner guards are a 1-inch by 1-inch angle that's made of a thin, clear plastic that's easily drillable and can be glued using silicone anywhere within your crabitat. With the holes, you can attach any types of decor to them. Then it's just a matter of snipping a zip tie and moving it to where you want. I always like to drill holes about 1 inch apart because that gives me endless amounts of places to attach decor. In the lower picture, I have the crabitat on its side. So the face that the egg crate is laying on is the background. So I glued the corner guard to the top of the topper and I left the egg crate as a spacer. I let it cure like that, and you'll see the reason why I did that later. But it works out great for having a removable background. More on that a few slides later. I used aquarium safe sealant to secure all of the corner guards. In this picture, you can see where I have them along the sides and also in various places along the top. And with all those holes, I have tons of options to be able to hang just about anything from them, whether it be hides, bridges, plants, you name it, it can hang in there. And it's just a matter of undoing a zip tie and moving it to wherever you want it. So the possibilities are endless. Once again, this should only be done with a new build, since the sealant gives off bad vapors that are harmful to hermit crabs. And also, they usually recommend 24 hours for it to be safe, but I usually give it a week or two. After a few days and dozens of different options, I decided to go with 2 pieces of cork ground. The long piece I had, I just used a saw and cut it in half. I also decided to use this piece of aquarium decor as well. In order to make it more three-dimensional, I ended up drilling holes through the aquarium decor just so I had more options to secure it to the background. I also drilled holes into the cork rounds so I could attach them too. I went with the 2 cork rounds just because in the other tank I had one, and all the hermit crabs had to be in just that one spot. So I figured I'd mix it up and give these guys 2 places to hide. This here is my big reveal of why I leave the one square undecorated. As you can see, the corner guard is on the top of the tank, and it's just enough room to be able to slide the background up into place if cut correctly. Then, with that being across the whole entire top, the background won't slip and slide forward and create a place for the hermit crabs to climb down behind it. In the next few slides, I'll show you how I attach the bottom of it with just 2 zip ties. And nothing else is needed. I don't need to glue the background to the tank, and it's just a matter of undoing 2 zip ties and I can pull it out. Pretty awesome, huh? This is looking at the bottom of the topper. So obviously the egg crate is the background. So what I did is took a drill and drilled 2 holes on the lip at the base of the topper. I was careful not to get close to the glass because the last thing you want to do is break that. But with those 2 holes in the bottom, I can run zip ties through them and the egg crate. That way, the bottom of the background is attached to the tank. And also, with the background going through the corner guard at the top, that whole entire background is not going anywhere. And then, if you want to change it or do any additional things, it's just a matter of cutting 2 zip ties and pulling it out, reworking it, and sliding it back in and zip tying it in place. Krusty is showing off the bottom of the tank. Highlighted by the arrows are the zip ties we use to attach the background to the base of the topper. Like I said earlier, it's just cutting the 2 zip ties and sliding the topper out to remove it. Pretty easy. The major work of the background is done now. So the only thing left really is adding the flare to it. I consider the flare anything that's extra just to give it a little bit more uniqueness. such as additional plants, flowers, whatever else. And you don't need 37 pieces of flair for it either. If people aren't sure, I'm referencing the 90s movie Office Space, starring Jennifer Aniston. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it because it is hysterical. We received these cool flowers with a rescue we did. Unfortunately, they had metal in them, which is a no-go for hermit crabs. Most people would probably just toss them in the trash and not think twice about it. I decided to try to use them. So I pulled them apart and removed all the metal, as you can see on the picture of the right. On the left are all the pieces that had metal in that were just thrown in the trash. On the bottom right, you can see the pieces before I do anything to them. There are different varieties of shapes and sizes, so I just handpick whatever I want, pinch them all together, and simply wrap a zip tie around them all. This is the finished product. As you can see, it's very similar to the original, but it's safe because it doesn't have the metal. With this too, you can do it in a variety of ways. You can add more or less flowers, or even just have it as the green leaves. It's pretty much up to you because right now it's your creation. I like to customize just about everything. Here I took some fern leaves and pulled them off of the strands. And then I attached them to more greenery using zip ties. From there, I can use whatever length of that I want and just simply cut the fit for what I need. I really like having the different varieties of colors. It just makes everything look more natural to me. With operating a hermit crab decor store, we end up with a lot of little pieces we're not quite sure what to do with. I always hate throwing this stuff out, but right now is a perfect opportunity to use up some of this stuff. Otherwise, what would it do? Just go in the trash? So, what better way to use it than to put it into the background? To attach the flare, it's as easy as stuffing it down into the background and then adding a zip tie or two to each piece just to keep it where you want it. And then once it's in place, simply trim the ends of the zip ties and you're good to go. After adding all the flare, this is the final result. In the bottom left and the top right, you can see where I added the little pieces of flowers. I think they look good in it because it just gives a little bit of extra color. On the very top center, you can also see the pieces that I added that were just miscellaneous scrap, so I managed to use them as well. All this just gives a little bit extra pop. The crabs don't care one way or another, but it gives me something else to look at. The decorating is almost finished, so now we can begin on the insulating and heating of the topper. As I mentioned earlier, I feel that toppers are for advanced crab keepers, and so I'm not really going to get too far involved with the insulating and heating because I feel that if you're building a topper, you should know pretty well how to maintain all of these things already. But just one of the things I know is this is going on a 75-gallon tank that I have no problems cranking up the heat to. I keep a thermostat on it and can easily keep it within the safe range and at the higher end of it or higher, so I know adding this little topper is not really going to affect the heat within the regular tank. Krusty is all ready to add the insulation. Here he's holding some Reflectix. It's an insulation you could get at home improvement stores that comes in a roll. It's kind of like bubble tape, but insulation. It's really easy to work with and does the job very well. Simply cut it to length and duct tape it on. We'll get to that next. I see that Krusty is getting ahead of me already. First, he started by taking pieces of duct tape and tearing them down the middle to give you two smaller pieces. Once he got those smaller pieces, he attached them in the four corners and then filled in across the rest of the top, bottom, and sides. I found that using smaller pieces makes this job a lot easier and you have less chance of the duct tape sticking where you don't want it to. This is the first topper I built. We called this one the Crab Pyre State Building. Since this topper was way bigger than the initial tank, I knew I would have to insulate it. The picture on the right, you can see the heat mat on the very top of the topper, and the rest of it is insulated, as I mentioned earlier. The reason I didn't insulate the heat pad is because the glass on the toppers are generally about half as thick as a standard tank. So with that, if it gets too hot in one area, the difference in heat throughout the glass can cause it to crack easier. It's just another thing to be cautious with when you're working with a topper, since the glass is a lot thinner. Okay, we have most of the hard work done. One of the last things we have to do now is actually place the topper onto the tank. So let's get started with that now. We decided to put the topper on this tank. It's your basic 75-gallon tank, 48 inches long and 18 inches deep. It's your run-of-the-mill that you would get just about anywhere. It also has a center brace in the middle. And if anybody was curious, during the Hanging with the Hermie events, we would generally set our laptop on the top of this tank while we did our presentations. Before we started construction on the actual topper, we did a test fit and placed it on top of the tank. As you can see, front to back, it fit great. Lengthwise, it was a little bit short to catch the center brace of the 75-gallon tank. The picture on the right shows that. So we're going to have to figure out a way in order to make up that space. Here's a better view of what I need to work with. I need to come up with something that's about 5 inches wide, along with about 16 inches or so long, in order to fill that gap once I remove the glass lid. The easiest way to make up that space is to use a sheet of plexiglass. Luckily we had this one laying around, so I didn't have to go out and buy it. This piece is about 3/16 of an inch thick, so it's perfect for what I need it for. I decided to make it about an inch or so longer than what I really needed. That way I have plenty of room in order to put weather stripping down to seal the topper to the rest of the tank. I can also drill holes along the one side to have more places to attach the core. I used a carpenter's square and 2 spring clamps to hold in place. That way, when I use a utility knife to score that, it won't move. That way I can get a clean cut. This can be done at home, but I found it rather difficult. Basically, I kept going over the same area over and over with the utility knife, like a lot of times, like 20, 30, maybe 40 times over and over until I got a deep enough cut. After I scored the plexiglass, I placed it on the ground on top of a 4x4 and stepped on it and applied pressure, and I managed to get it to crack and break right along where the score was. The picture on the right shows how it made a fairly clean score with a few little edges I had to clean up with a file. Once again, I personally think this was the hardest part of the entire build, and if you're not comfortable getting this far in depth, I'm sure you can find a glass shop or somewhere else that could cut the plexiglass for you if you have all the dimensions that you need. Here's the plexiglass in place after I managed to get it cut and cleaned up. As you can see, it's a perfect fit. It fits relatively tight and doesn't slide around easily, so I don't think the hermit crabs are going to be able to figure out how to get it to move easily. At least not unless they all decide to pile up and do the whole heave-ho all together. The way they bicker and pick around, I don't think that's going to happen. I decided to use this Automarine rubber weather seal. I used foam on other builds, but this is what I found and I figured I would give it a try. I don't think there's really a difference between the rubber or the foam, just because a crab will be a crab and pick it whatever you put in the crab habitat. So whether they pick rubber or foam, it's going to be what they do, and I think it's just your personal preference on what they're going to possibly pick at. Before I apply the weather stripping, I always like to clean the edges with rubbing alcohol. I simply put some rubbing alcohol on a paper towel and go over the edges to make sure it's clean. That way it'll stick a lot better. When I apply the weather stripping, I always like to peel off small sections of the backing and slowly go from one end of the tank to the other. I find it a lot easier peeling off short sections rather than the whole thing and getting it in place. Once it's in place, I'll press it down firmly just to make sure it's stuck to where it needs to be. This is also a good time to figure out if you're going to have anything going inside the tank, such as my temperature probe or air lines or anything else you might be wanting to put inside of your tank. This here is another topper I did. As you can see, this has the foam weather stripping, and I notched it out so I could put my temperature probe through that area. Once again, just be careful and don't pinch your wires. Krusty has all the weather stripping in place and is about ready to put it onto the actual tank. Let's see how that goes. After placing the topper onto the tank, I noticed that the weather stripping didn't quite seal around the edges. The upper picture, you could see the gap between the center brace of the tank and the topper. Also, the piece of plexiglass sat a little bit lower, so I have to add a little bit of weather stripping on both of those to make up for the space. While the topper was in place, I simply marked it with a magic marker and removed the topper. And then I cleaned the edges again with rubbing alcohol just to make sure it would seat properly. I also did the same with the plexiglass. That way I know exactly where to put the weather stripping. With the plexiglass, I decided to drill some holes in it, as I mentioned earlier. Unfortunately, one of the holes ended up cracking out, but it wasn't bad enough for me to have to redo the whole thing. Plus, it was a major pain, so I really didn't feel like going through all that work again. With the additional weather stripping in place, you can see that the holes sealed up nicely. Once I got the topper in place, it was time to attach it. I used the same process that I used in order to tape the insulation to the back of the topper. Rather than tearing the duct tape in half, I simply left it full width. Thanks for bearing with me. We're in the final stretch now, I promise. It's been a long way, but I think our hard work is finally paying off. Let's continue on with the final stretch, shall we? Right now we're looking down at the topper. The corner guards work really well attached to the top for putting any type of decor in them. In the lower right, you can see where I have a humidity gauge hanging. I like to keep one at the top of the topper and one also in the regular tank. That way I can just monitor and keep an eye to see how much the humidity and the temperature fluctuates between the two. Like I said earlier, I know the way this tank is, and I have no problems heating it, and never had any problems with the humidity as well. Between the two, there's only a percentage difference of humidity, along with a degree or two of temperature, so I know the whole thing is within a safe zone. Back in January at the Hanging with the Hermes event, we ended up winning this cool hive hide from Lucky Crab Company, and we figured it was a perfect time to add this to our topper. Thank you, Meredith. I really like showing off the corner guards, and I hope by me constantly bringing them up brings everyone to realize how cool they can be. In these two pictures, you can just see more ways that I added additional decor throughout the whole distance of the tank. It just gives a lot more depth than just having a background. I really love these, and hopefully after my hyping them, everybody else will consider using them. Here are two more pictures of the completed topper. The picture on the left shows the topper all the way down into the base tank. If you look close, you can see how I have decor that goes from the base tank all the way up into the topper. This just gives the crabs a lot more ways to access the top rather than just climbing up the background. The picture on the right just shows looking straight in to the topper. You can see how I have the gauge holder, the coconut hide, Meredith's item, and several other things attached to the corner guards. This here is just to illustrate how much depth there is by having the corner guards and all the different things you can attach. As you can see, the decor flows all the way from the front of the tank all the way to the back. And then the long piece on the left is just hanging by one zip tie on the top. If I have to move or place anything in the lower tank, I can simply pivot that out of the way and get to what I need in the bottom. The same thing goes with the coconut hide. That there is just one zip tie that's easily snipped off and replaced if I need to move that out of the way. It makes it really easy for getting in and doing anything you have to do with the lower tank. Right now we're looking through the doors of the topper down into the 75-gallon tank. The food dish is on a shelf about 3 inches from the top of the original tank. So you can see how much more room the topper actually gives. And that wood on the left goes from the very top of the topper all the way down to the top of the substrate in the lower tank. So that gives the crabs an additional climbing way to get up into the actual topper. After all that hard work, we finally had our very first explorer. It only took him that night to find it, so within a few hours, he was climbing around. I don't know if he actually explored the whole entire thing, but at least he was along the edge and knows it's there. Once again, you never know how long it'll take a crab to find something. Sometimes they find something within a few hours, other times it takes them weeks, possibly months. They're kind of like me in the morning when I forget where I put my car keys and walk by them 100 times before I realize where they were. Just be patient and eventually they'll find all the extra space. In closing, here's some of my final thoughts after building 2 toppers. I found that my plans will always change from what I initially planned to build. I don't know why, they just do, but I end up going with what I come up with on the fly. I also don't like to rush, and I take my time. This topper took me well over a month to complete, so I wasn't in a hurry, but I really like the way it turned out, even though it's small. One of the longest things it took me to figure out is how to make the background removable and have it easy to do. That alone, in my previous build, probably took me over a month to figure out, but it worked well for me in 2 Gravitats, so hopefully it'll work good for you as well. I also like to look into nature for inspiration when I build. It's just having uneven, misshaped logs, different colored leaves, flowers, whatever else makes it easy to incorporate into a crab tank. I don't think the crabs care, but I like the way it looks. I always like to try to think like a crab too. Okay, if I was climbing around and had to live in this, would I hide in this? Would I climb on that? Would this be a fun place to hide? Would I like to pinch and tear this apart? I don't know if it helps or not, but it's fun to do. The most important part is to have fun while you're doing it. Take your time, have fun, and enjoy the build because hopefully you're not going to be tearing it apart anytime soon, unless it is to actually do your next upgrade of a larger tank, which generally happens to everybody. For a lot of the topics I did not get into with this, be sure to check out these websites for more information: Crab Street Journal, Lycos, the CrabCon YouTube channel, and for more decor options, be sure to swing by our Etsy shop. I would like to dedicate this presentation to Ginny Soriano. Most people remember her as Hobo Hermie, one of the best hermit crab food shops on Etsy. Without her, this presentation would not have been possible. In 2023, we ended up adopting all of her hermit crabs and managed to receive several of her toppers along with a lot of her decor. So a lot of the items we used in this build were from her personal collection. So she's still making an impact within the hermit crab world today. We really miss you, Ginny. Thank you for watching. Stop by our booth and say hi in the vendor section. And also, Krusty wants to get a selfie with you, so say hi to him as well. Thanks again. See you next time.